Oh, hi, it's your old buddy Zoo, and the other day I was doing that thing where I went down to my basement to find a specific SD card, and I found myself rooting around in boxes for 45 minutes, which is essentially how basements work. And I came across this, my Secret of Mana box. It's not hidden. I had it out on my desk from a video I did a couple weeks ago, but the thing that struck me was this price tag. You can see right there, the sticker's still on it. And it was because I didn't buy it new, I bought it used. I bought it for $39.95, which was almost half MSRP, which I guess that was cool at the time because it was a deal, but it's cool now because it speaks to an era we've kind of lost, the era where you could actually buy a physical video game and own it. This is mine. It's been mine since I was a kid. No one has to give me permission to own a digital copy of it. The company that made the Super Nintendo is what, 4 or 5 generations beyond the Super Nintendo. The publisher barely even acknowledged that it exists anymore, and yet it's here in a box. It's mine. I can hold it. It's tangible. And I've been thinking about this for a week or so now, and the reason I've been thinking about it is because Sony told us that this can't happen anymore. This notion where you can buy a physical copy of a game and own it forever, that's gone. They're not going to do it anymore. So today I want to talk about what Sony announced, why they announced it, how Nintendo of all companies is half-heartedly holding the line for physical media, and why this retro handheld community that you and I are a part of has been secretly, accidentally building the answer to this very problem for years. Anyway, let's get to it. Number 1, starting January 2028, Sony will stop producing physical discs for all new PlayStation games. After that, every new release will be sold digitally through the PlayStation Store and other online retailers. Games released before that cutoff should continue to be available physically. And then number 2, Sony is shutting down the PlayStation 3 store on the PlayStation 3 in select markets later this year. That's going to be followed by global closures of the PS3 and the PlayStation Vita stores next year. Most countries are going to lose PS3 store and Vita store in July of 2027, but other countries will close in 2026. You're looking at August 2026 for PlayStation 3 in Mexico, Honduras, and Nicaragua, and then late 2026 for other parts of Latin America and the Middle East. And of course, this came just a few days after Sony pulled like 500 movies away from people's accounts. They announced that starting September 1st, all purchased content related to the production and distribution firm Studio Canal will be removed from PlayStation users' video libraries due to the end of a content licensing agreement. If you live in Europe and you bought copies of, I don't know, Shaun of the Dead and Terminator 2 a couple years ago, you thought you bought them, but Sony's saying you were only renting them. What the f***? And before anyone in the good old US of A gets too comfortable, Sony tried this crap in 2023 with stuff from the Discovery Channel, and they only stopped at the 11th hour because a deal was negotiated. That's not protection, it's a stay of execution. So that's the news. Physical games will be gone by 2028. The PlayStation 3 and the Vita stores will be gone even sooner, maybe, depending on where you live, in this year, 2026. And oh, by the way, Sony thinks they can delete from your devices that you paid for. So when a normal person hears that Sony's getting rid of physical discs in 2028, they probably go, who cares? I don't buy physical stuff, I download all my stuff. And I get it because I download a lot of my stuff too. But here is what's on the chopping block if this whole mindset continues. You lose region lock games that never came out anywhere else. You lose Vita games that were exclusive to the Vita and are about to disappear forever. You lose the ability to lend a game to your buddy. You lose the ability to give the game to someone, to give it to your kids, to let your neighbor borrow it. And you lose the box, the manual, the art, every tactile thing about video games for the last, 40 years? That told you that you owned the game. And don't even get me started on the movies, because yeah, it's a one-time thing with one studio, but holy shit. They sold you something, they waited a couple years, and then they yoinked it away because a license ended. The same company that has been telling you that piracy is theft also just told you you don't really own the thing you paid full price for. You didn't lease it, you didn't rent it, you expect to own it for as long as you had a PlayStation account. And then Sony just told you, that ain't true. That's not a functioning ecosystem. That's a big player in the industry just flat out giving up. The dystopian philosophy of YOLO nothing and be happy has finally made its way to video games.
Great.
So why is Sony doing this? It's not stupid. It's not cartoonishly evil. it does make sense from the perspective of one accounting department that is completely disconnected from the actual industry, the boots on the ground with people who play and buy the games. It makes sense on that one spreadsheet, but nowhere else. Physical media has margin problems. You have to press the disc, you have to cut the disc, you have to ship the disc. Retailers take a cut. Sometimes stock doesn't get sold. That sits around. It's a whole mess, but it's the way we've been doing things since the beginning of the industry. Digital cuts every one of those steps out, and that means Sony gets to keep a higher cut of the profit margins. And more importantly, Sony gets complete control over what is released, when it's released, and when it can be pulled back without you knowing or even being able to stop it. Because in a digital-only model, Sony gets to decide forever what you have access to. If a license expires, they can take the game away from you. If a publisher goes under, they take the game away from you. If Sony decides a game is embarrassing or off-brand, you guessed it, they take it away. And you will have no recourse because you are not buying a game anymore. You are buying a license to a game that lives somewhere on Sony's servers. And if they take it away, and you don't immediately pull your power cord and your internet cord, rip your Wi-Fi cables out, it's gone for you too, which is a great business model for Sony. It's a genuinely fantastic business module for them. But for me and you and the normal consumer, it's a deal. All right, here's where the video gets interesting, because you think if Sony's getting rid of physical media starting in 2028, that's just the way the winds are blowing. That's the way the industry is going. It's part of modernization of the entire gaming hobby. But you're wrong, because Nintendo of all companies, is staying solid with physical cartridges. And I want you to sit with that just for a second, because if you had asked me just a couple years ago, which gaming company would be the very first one to take away physical media, I would have said Nintendo. Nintendo is the most jealously defensive, litigation-happy, obsessively controlled publisher in the entire gaming industry. They sued Yuzu into the ground, they DMCA fan games on site, they treat every ROM site as a personal attack against the chairman of Nintendo, and so if any company on the face of the earth had a reason to yank physical media away and lock consumers into a digital-only ecosystem that they control, honestly, I thought it was going to be Nintendo. But they haven't, which is weird. And every Switch 2 first-party release outside of that Pokemon Pokepia game has had a physical cart. And that's in 2026, a full, fat, entire game on a cart. At the same time, another major player in the industry is saying it's impossible to keep producing physical media for your games. Now, there is a caveat, because Nintendo hedged their bet with the key card carts. These game key carts are physical carts that contain no actual data. They just let you download a game. And once the game is downloaded to your Switch 2, it still needs to be inserted because it acts as a key for you to unlock the game that you bought. Now, the reason for this is because the Switch 2 carts theoretically cap out at around 64 gigabytes, and they're expensive to make. And if you are a small publisher with a small game, you have to buy that same 64 gig card, even if your game's only 4 gigs. And so these game key cards are a way for smaller publishers to get into the physical stores, and they're also a way for publishers that make giant games to actually get that game onto your Switch 2, considering you can only get 64 gigs on one card. So the picture's complicated because in a lot of ways, Nintendo first party is doing it right. They're selling you a card, and they can't ever take that away. Some third-party publishers are hedging their bets with a card that's not really a card. It's a little thing that calls home to make sure you still own the game. And then, of course, Sony is walking away from the party altogether. If Nintendo, the company that if I asked our audience, which company do you have beef with, it would probably be Nintendo. If that company, in 2026, can ship out full games on carts for the most part, then Sony's, physical media isn't sustainable line, it's just bullshit. They're not doing it because they physically can't. They're not making games because they don't want to make them anymore. And that's the difference. You got one company that can't be bothered to make physical games anymore, and another company that won't shut up about lawsuits, but at least they give you a physical cart. Alright, so the console industry is kind of a mess. Sony's checking out, Nintendo's half in, half out, and physical media is dying in the places that used to define our hobby. Where does that leave us? It leaves us, funnily enough, in the same place we've been for almost 6 years now. Because, and I don't think we appreciate this enough, the retro handhelds community has been accidentally low-key building the infrastructure of a game preservation system for years now. We've got front ends like Emulation Station, Cocoon, Neo Station, and they let you organize your games on your physical device, not on a server somewhere. We've got community firmware like Rocknix and Newly that keeps devices useful long after the manufacturers moved on. And we've got emulation projects like Game Native and WinLater and RetroDeck that lets you run software the original platform holder has decided is no longer commercially interesting to support. This is preservation, this is infrastructure, and it's being run by a bunch of hobbyists on GitHub and Discord with no support from the industry that we've been secretly helping for the last 5.5 years. Frank Cifaldi over at the Video Game History Foundation has been saying this for years. He runs an actual preservation institution, and he's tried to work with the industry's own trade groups to find a legal path forward, and they've refused. Every time. But the scene just kept going. They kept building the tools anyway. They kept making sure that when Sony finally pulled the plug on the PS3 store, somebody, somewhere, had the games backed up and ready to go. And when the company refuses to support a way for you to play the games you bought, it stops becoming piracy and it turns into preservation. And these companies with brand new consoles that are effectively PC games with a Xbox or a PlayStation Proton layer, they better watch out. Because if we can get Steam games playing on an Android handheld, your higher end emulators might start popping up faster than the lawyers can knock them down. If they push things too far. All right, let's talk about the whole piracy thing. I just brought it up, and if I don't talk about it, everyone in the comments will beat me to it. So let's head them off at the pass. The begrudging industry line for a while now has been, if you own the game, if you own the cart, if you own the disc, legally, I hate it, but I guess you're allowed to have a backup copy for your own use. You can't download a ROM. You can't share it. That would be illegal. Theoretically, though, you are maybe allowed to have your own backup copy. And that's the line in the sand that they've drawn. The problem is that line only holds if the game card actually exists. You actually own it. When the disc doesn't exist because it was never manufactured, or they pulled it because of a licensing agreement, or they pulled it because they said, oh, oops, it was too Japanese, that line falls apart. Because at that point, downloading a ROM isn't stealing a sale from anyone because there's not a game to be bought. The publisher's not selling it. Nobody's selling it. You can't buy it, so I guess you can't really steal it then, And when publishers can revoke access to our media at any time for any reason without any recourse of the consumer, then the moral geometry of downloading a ROM starts to look a lot different than it did in, 1998 when you were messing around on your PC with ZSNES or Nesticle. Let's be clear, I am not telling anyone to steal anything. I am not advocating piracy. Just put that up in big letters on the screen, Gary. What I am saying is that when the industry as a whole has spent the better part of a decade tearing down every legitimate path to accessing your old games or games you've paid for, and then acting shocked and appalled when the community steps in to try to pick up the work that they dropped on the ground, then I don't have a lot of patience for that whole piracy argument anymore. And I don't think a big part of our audience does either. Now, don't be a jackass. Don't steal indie games from some young developer trying to make it on Steam. But then again, if Xbox or PlayStation is telling you that you don't really own that $70 game you just paid for, then maybe downloading a ROM isn't really piracy. I'm just saying. So let's bring this back to the actual devices, because this isn't hypothetical. This is me filming a video on a Sunday afternoon. I've got the AYN Thor on my desk right now. Dual OLED absolute unit. It plays every PlayStation 1 game I own, every PSP game I own, every 3DS game I own, and pretty much every Vita game I care about through Vita 3K, although emulation there is still in its infancy. And the Vita is a library that is, right now, it's on the endangered species list at Sony. I would expect work on Vita 3K to spike soon. Then you got the Ambernic RG477M, which is my favorite 4x3 device. It handles PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2, GameCube, anything you want on a screen in that shape and aspect ratio. And full circle moment, it plays Secret of Mana beautifully. The same game I showed you at the beginning of the video, the same code, it's just running on a device that came out 33 years later, in a form factor that didn't exist when I bought the cart at Video Game Trader. And then of course the Retroid Pocket Nova, which is coming soon, might actually knock this out of my hands as the ultimate 4x3 device. We'll see. But the point is, these devices keep coming, they keep innovating, they keep getting better. So here's where we are. The hardware exists, the software exists, the community exists. If Sony pulls the trigger on the PS3 store in Latin America this fall, which they said they're doing, then a bunch of people who live south of me lose the ability to pay for those games. But they don't lose the ability to play those games. Because the people in this community, on Discords, on GitHubs, on random forums, they made sure it was still an option. And I hate that that's our only option, but it's kind of where we're at now. Push those eggheads too far and Sony's going to find themselves dealing with some sort of weird meshnet PS5 emulator with games coming out on release date. And by the way, you can play it in a web browser. Don't start someone's villain arc, Sony. Just let us buy the games. So here's where I land on this, because the retro handheld scene isn't just pure hobbyism. It's not just people buying way too many devices and putting them on shelves, although that is a pretty big component of the hobby. It's the working, functional, actually real prototype of what it looks like when one of these big hobbies gives up on us and we kind of have to make our own way forward. And then you got Nintendo here that's proving the exception to the rule. They're a giant publisher who is sticking with physical game carts for the most part. They're hedging their bets with those game keys. Sony is leaving the arena altogether. Xbox is too busy with its studio foreclosure side quest to even know what's going on. And then you've got this community, the retro handhelds community, still finding a way that even as the servers spin down and the discs stop being pressed, there's still a way for a normal person to spend a Sunday afternoon playing a game they loved. You didn't just join a gaming subculture when you got into this. You apparently joined a preservationist society. Nobody sent you a letter or a pin in the mail, but you're in it regardless. And before we close out, I really want to hear what you think about this one, because there's probably a ton of you who've been thinking about it longer than I have. Let me know in the comments, what's a game you're worried about losing, or flip that, what's a system you've kept on your shelf because you're worried about not being able to play those games anymore? I read all your comments, even the mean ones, and sometimes I make videos about the good ones. So bring it on. Well, Gary, the clock on the wall says it's time for... What did we learn? And we learned that Sony's long-term business plan is apparently a slow-motion memory hole, which is exciting for their shareholders and depressing for everyone else. We learned that Nintendo of all companies, the most jealously litigious company there is somehow holding the line on physical media. We learned that we've entered a brave new world where you don't actually own the games you paid money for. And I learned, I didn't really show you this on camera, Gary's convinced Sony's doing all this because they want to re-release the PSP in 2029. And they need all the factories converted to making UMDs. He's cornered my mailman about it twice. And I told him, Gary, that's not how this works. That's not how any of this works. If you thought this video worked, remember to like, subscribe, hype, and of course, leave comments. Let me know what you think about Sony. Let me know what you think about Nintendo as the last bastion of freedom somehow. And I guess let me know what you think about my new haircut. It's not too bad. Anyway, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.